Welcome back to another episode of Stumbling and Fumbling. And today, what we're going to discuss might be deemed slightly controversial, but it's definitely ingrained in the Indian society. And I think it's just better that we talk through it. It's related to perception. So, if somebody is better in English, if someone's gone to an English medium school, they're perceived as better. Is that necessarily true? And what are the implications behind it? Moreover, if this is a perception, why this perception even came about in the first place? So, Arjun, long introduction. What are your initial thoughts?
I agree with you. The perception's definitely there. Should it be there? No. And I can speak to that from my experience in undergrad. You and I went to the same undergrad university, Jadavpur in Calcutta. A lot of our friends came from non-English medium schools. They were taught in Bengali or Hindi, and they're doing fine, probably better than us, which just goes on to show that it does not matter what is the medium in which you communicate. As long as you can communicate, that's what matters.
Yeah, so I think what we need to talk about here is also the opportunities. Is it true that probably if you know English, mm, there is greater opportunity you have? And also, is there a basic degree of English today that's mandatory for you?
Look, in a country like India where there's so many people and there's limited opportunities, anything that gives you an extra edge is helpful. So if English helps you that way, absolutely. Now, do people perceive you as better if you speak better English? Unfortunately, people do. That's what I have seen. But at the end of the day, irrespective of what language you study and if you can communicate, I think communication is the key. Yes, initially there could be a perception, but as long as you can communicate and prove your value or your worth to the other person, I think that takes you a long way as well.
Yeah, but the bigger question here is why would you think this perception came in the first place? Like, was that because we had British ruling us, or was that because for any Indian who goes outside India, most of them, the only language that they communicate is in English? And of course, people would think outside India it's much more glossy and the life is much more glamorous, whereas it might not be true. Like we've been living outside for a long time. But the bigger question here is why is that perception in the society today?
You spoke about two things. I'll do you one better and give you one more. So let's talk about the first thing, the British rule that we had. I think that definitely has a factor and we cannot ignore history. So those 200 years of British influence definitely gives that perception. The second thing that you speak about, outside India, English being a necessary medium of communication, I don't fully agree, because if you go to places like France or Germany, I don't think English will get you a job. Now, the third thing that I want to talk about, which is also another reason perhaps, is that what is our national language? It's not Hindi, right? But the general perception oftentimes is that Hindi is the common language, and there's a whole other debate regarding that. But if we do not have one common medium of communication, what's something that everyone can kind of speak? A Bengali might not be able to speak Telugu. A person from Jharkhand might not be able to speak Bengali, but everyone knows a bits and pieces of English. So that's how the presence of English also helps, and it gives you the edge. And at some point, it leads to perception.
Wow. Yeah, this is interesting because when you look at people interviewing for jobs, and I think this is an interesting correlation between the two countries, what I have observed is in India, it's more about technical stuff and numbers and hard facts during the interview, depending on what kind of interviews or what kind of companies you are seeking a job. Whereas when I came here about 6, 7 years back, I saw that the impetus was more on storytelling. It was more on dialogue delivery. It was more on packaging or massaging the entire thing that you have. And that's why you see that someone's probably studied geography and that person's doing really well in banking. I'm not saying one is good versus the other, but it's a stark difference when I begin to compare India with some of the other countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And that way, so if storytelling is important, again, it does not matter which language you say tell the story in. For example, if someone comes to Canada, both of us have Indian accents and we communicate just fine. That way, it's just how you tell the story, right? Rather than the language. Now, obviously, if you're having to think before you say any sentence because you're not proficient in English at all, in a country like USA or Canada, it becomes a little difficult. But if you go to Netherlands or Germany, it probably won't be as difficult. On the other hand, if you know only English and you go to France, it might be difficult to get a job there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But the reason I'm not too sold on that France point or German point is we also have to look at where they are in the global economy. So we are talking about developed countries, and developed countries have a system around them. They have a sense of pride or a sense of accomplishment that, yes, fine, we are probably there. Whereas if you look at India, we are still developing. So I don't know if that's got to do anything with Indians and English and all that. And mind you, just as a matter of fact, India is the second English is spoken most widely in the United States, and after that, it is India. I was just listening to a Shashi Tharoor interview the other day, um, and it was fascinating. And he said that if we were to look at the exact stat, we might possibly be English might be most widely spoken in India, but of course, we don't have official stats because if we look at official stats, then Shashi Tharoor does not know English, which is laughable at best.
Right, right. I saw a similar interview and he was laughing about it. See, when you talk about America and India, at the end of the day, it's also perception. What do I mean by that? Most people in America don't really have a huge idea of other English speaking countries. When I went to Texas to study, a lot of times people would be surprised that I could communicate in English. And it was just irritating at after a point to explain that my medium of instruction in school was English, but there could be someone else who studied in Bengali or in Hindi. But yeah, in general, I agree. Like a huge number of people speak English in India, and look, theory and ideology aside, I do agree that anything that gives you an edge, it gives you an edge. So if English gives you a perception of being smarter, hey, I would rather learn English and have that perception to get the job.
Yeah, you're right, because it's a distinction between what is right versus what sells. And quite recently, in our last episode, I think we spoke about Republic TV. I think they know what is right, but they also know what sells. And that's something which is remarkable. One of the other points I wanted to touch upon was about vernacular languages in the country. Now, if a person only knows a vernacular language, is it going to be extremely challenging for that person to survive outside that state? So, if this is India, should a conscious attempt be made by everybody to learn or know at least two languages? And it's not mandatory that one of those two languages are English.
I think yes. When I left Bengal, I grew up in Bengal and I knew English, Hindi, and Bengali. But if I had known only Bengali and then I moved to a different state, and I wouldn't have been able to communicate because not everyone knows Bengali, right? Uh, Actually, you can speak to that because you came from Jamshedpur to Calcutta. And how was that experience? I don't think you knew a word of Bengali when you came to Calcutta, and you've been in Calcutta for a while. So how was that experience for you?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I mean, when I came, it was a shock because I didn't know that there will be so many people. So there was literally day-to-day struggle to the extent that I wanted to leave the city. So getting on a bus, you don't know how to communicate. Going to a restaurant or any particular place, you didn't know how to communicate. So what we started doing was we started avoiding this topic. So what that means is we would go to the malls where people speak in English. And I think we were fortunate enough to be able to afford such a living. And then we would join probably say debating club or quiz club where you had people who would speak in English. So I think we tried to avoid this for the longest time, for the first year and a half. And it was at that time that that I learned Bangla real fast. But I stayed in the hostel, right? So it was, I would say, I would hear it every single day. So it wasn't such a big deal for me to understand. And there are quite a few bongs in Jamshedpur. So it wasn't like I was coming to a new place wherein I would not understand that the person speaking in Bangla. But yeah, it was extremely difficult. And it was difficult not only for me, I think others found it harder.
Yeah, I can see that. It was very easy for me because I knew Bengali, but when my first job out of college was in Aurangabad, and even though I studied Hindi for 3 years in high school, and obviously I knew Hindi watching Bollywood, I grew up watching Bollywood, but I'd forgotten reading and writing in Hindi. The last time I wrote an essay in Hindi was in class 8. So when I moved to Aurangabad and I wanted to buy a vada pav from a shop, it was a challenge. First of all, everything was in Marathi, but the numbers, at least you could still kind of understand if you understood Hindi. But I mean, it was a godsend. Like, it was not close to Bengali, it was not close to English, so it was pretty difficult. If I hadn't known Hindi, it would have been a problem. So I think knowing two languages is definitely important. Now, of course, if you go to, let's say, Tamil Nadu, right, or Karnataka,
Right.
again, Hindi might not be the best tool for you, but then English will come in handy. So yeah, two languages I think is pretty important.
Yeah, and we'll probably try to cover that misconception of Hindi as a national language in one of our next episodes. Any closing thoughts on this perception of English? And more importantly, would you actually say that people should be proactive enough in trying to learn the language? Like, it's getting controversial, but I'm still trying to see what your thoughts are.
Look, as I said, practicality over ideology, right? So if the perception sells, yes, people should try to proactively learn the language just so that they get an edge. We learn something, everything that gives us an edge, right? In engineering, we learned programming because it would give us an edge. So why not learn a language? People learned German language in undergrad because it would give an edge, and there was free education in Germany at the time. I don't know about now. So if it gives an edge, it gives an edge, and you go to get that extra skill set. So yeah, that's what I think. What about you?
Yeah, I personally think that it is something which, as any working professional, you have a toolkit, and then um, the tools within your toolkit are armors that you have to show when you go and work. And English is just one of them. But again, it's an important thing to actually have. Uh, you might not, you don't need to be super fluent in it. You don't need to be one of the best in it. Like we took Shashi Tharoor's name. You don't need to be a Shashi Tharoor. But at the same point of time, you probably need to be able to communicate, because very soon you'll feel that oh my gosh, like half of the jobs that I'm trying to apply to, I'm not allowed to, because I probably cannot communicate in the language that they conduct meetings, they write emails, so on and so forth. So I think it's probably about practicality rather than forcing our way into what is good or what's bad. So this was really interesting. This is a topic which is very close to my heart, so thank you for doing this. And if you have any suggestions, I would say, viewers, if you have any suggestions on any topic that we should cover, anything that we should discuss, feel free to put that in the comment section below. We'll be happy to know what your thoughts are. Again, till next time, bye.